So you kind of almost see these kind of two diverging schools, people who are pay attention to the eight opening points and those who appear a little bit more concerned with perhaps the pathways of the points.
I think the split, though, is
That's my take.
between
Sorry.
acupuncturists versus herbalists who use the eight
Hmm.
extraordinary vessels. The herbalists don't give a, about the points, those points. But there's also this funny story that's not. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's a story you can read. Maybe you guys know about it. That when Nixon went to China and he's talking to, I think, Deng Xiaoping, and he says, "What do you think of the French Revolution? What effect did it have on Western culture?" And Deng Xiaoping says,
Wow.
"Too soon to tell." And
Huh.
I think the thing about Li Shujian and those kind of people, Hua Shou, who wrote an elaboration on the 14 channels, and people like that, is like too soon to tell those 8 points. It's like not enough time has passed. There's not enough evidence yet. And for us, 300 years or whatever sounds like a huge amount of time, but for them, it was nothing.
Greetings and welcome back to the Locus Class podcast. I am your host, Will Gravells, joined as always by my co-host, Michael Brown, and we're very, very honored to have on the show today the esteemed, the august Lorraine Wilcox. Um, Lorraine,
Nice to have you, Lorraine.
Yep, thank you very much for taking out the time and being with us today. We're very happy to have you.
My pleasure.
And can you introduce yourself just a little bit? However you want to do that.
I'm just a weirdo who's obsessed with the old books on Chinese medicine.
Right up
But I
our
think
alley.
I'm in good company.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we might have to kind of get a little bit of information out of you. So please tell us, Lorraine, what was the first book that you actually published? Because I'm not sure. I know you started translating, but prior to releasing translations, did you do the book on Moxa? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I did 2 books on Moxa. The first one was actually my dissertation that got rewritten a bit because, why do a dissertation if you can't turn it into a book? And
Yeah.
that was on Moxa, and it had a lot of translation in it, although I shudder to think the quality of the translation, because that was a long time ago. Maybe, I don't know, 2006. I'd have to look in the book and see. But I had to come up with a dissertation topic, and I was poking through old books and translating little pieces just for myself. And one of the things that surprised me was that all these old herbalists really respected Moxa. They might never do acupuncture, but they'd do bleeding therapy and they'd do Moxa. And that kind of intrigued me because when I went to school, all they showed us was stinky Moxa sticks. And, I saw in a book, there's direct Moxa, there's indirect Moxa, but I never saw it in school. So I just got curious why the old, even herbalists loved Moxa. And so I was just looking for things to translate from Tianshi or Jiang Jebin or, whoever.
Could I just ask before we get into that, is that because I saw that you taught yourself Chinese. Was that around the time that you taught yourself Chinese during that dissertation, or?
Well, it's not like I'm done yet, but whoever
Yeah.
is,
Right. Yeah.
when I was in acupuncture school, I graduated in 1988. And when I was in school, I kind of wanted to, but there weren't enough brain cells to learn the stuff I needed to pass the state board and to study Chinese at the same time. So afterwards, like I studied for a long time with a feng shui shifu, a feng shui and astrology teacher who is from Hong Kong. And we wanted him to teach a class in Zui Doshu, which is this
cool.
Chinese 12 house Chinese astrology thing. And he said, I don't know how to do this because like there are all these stars and I don't even know how to say them in English. And I was used to pinyin from herbs. And I said,
Yeah.
well, I'll figure it out. So I just bought a Chinese dictionary, Chinese to English dictionary. And I figured out how to look up words in the dictionary, and I got the pinyin, but I was also looking at the meaning of the words. So that's kind of how I started. And then, there weren't books in English on Zui Doshu or hardly on feng shui, at least no quality books. So, there's a Chinese community near me, there are bookstores. So I'd find books in Chinese and just poke around in them and try and translate stuff word by word. And,
that I can't imagine a more punishing way to learn Chinese than to start with Zui Doshu, probably some of the most obscure Chinese like possible.
Well, it's old Chinese. I did eventually take a couple classes at a community college, which were highly unsatisfying because it's all modern Chinese, like asking how to get on the airplane and, stuff like that. And every once in a while I'd go up to the teacher and I'd say, ask him about a word, and he'd say, that's archaic.
Forget about that.
Yeah. So I don't know. I just get obsessed with things. And so I was obsessed with that for a long time. But after, I really very quickly felt that, in The Wizard of Oz, when, it's all black and white in canvas, and then she gets to Oz and suddenly it's all in color. I just, even with so little knowledge of Chinese, just a dictionary and looking things up word by word, I felt like suddenly everything had a lot more color. And so then I had gotten bored with Chinese medicine pretty quickly after I graduated. But once I had gotten where I could get a little bit out of trying to translate stuff, Chinese medicine then opened up for me in a whole new way. And so then I got bored with all the astrology and feng shui and turned back to Chinese medicine. Mostly I'm self-studied, but I read books on grammar. I have people I can ask questions to, and I did take a few semesters at a community college, which didn't help a lot, but it was something.
Wow.
If I can just come back and say, I really liked your analogy talking about learning Chinese kind of provided color. Like I always talk about when I learned Chinese, it kind of really gave me context. But I like kind of like, your analogy has it was like black and white, and then you could see kind of everything. And that is, I had much the same in an English school as well here in Australia. You've just kind of been reading everything in English, and then all of a sudden you start reading a little bit of Chinese, you start looking at the Chinese texts, and it's just kind of like, it's like a little bit of like a floodgate, just kind of, and it is a little bit overwhelming, but at the same time, it's incredibly inspiring.
That's how I felt the first time when I really started to figure out that there was this thing called C-text, and like everything was in there, like that you could ever want. I was like, oh my God. Yeah. And then, you just can get lost in tech, and then the ability to search too, of course. So like anything that you ever want to know about, and then you just type in a keyword and like stuff for 2,000 years pops up.
Better than Disneyland.
Yeah.
Well, so Lorraine, tell us, and about what was the first book that you translated? Was it, now let me take a guess, was it the fifth volume of the Genju Dachang, or the complete Compendium of Acupuncture Moxibustion? Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I thought. That was your first text. Yeah,
That was
so
the first all Chinese. I mean, the previous Moxa books had translation in it, but that was the first, like, translating a solid block of something.
Wow.
And so if I recall, that was kind of pioneered by Jonathan Schell and the Chinese medicine databases, wanting to try and, you know, translate that text in its entirety. And if I recall, I think volumes 1, 5, 8, and 9 have been done.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's 4 out of the 10 volumes. And I guess you could say kind of like volume 6 and 7, my work, explanations of channels and points, kind of covers those with a little bit of extra information. But you know, we're still missing a little bit out there. But that volume 5 is quite an interesting text, because it has a bit of extra stuff by Yang Zhizhou, but also some of older ideas. Particularly, I find interesting that probably a lot of people, you know, you see a lot of people talk about the 8 extraordinary channels, but they completely ignore this text. And there's a fair chunk of that text, of that volume, is about the extraordinary channels and what they treat, right?
Wow, nice.
Yeah, but even more interesting than that is it called Zhenjing Zhenan, which is by Douhan Qing, which is yeah, now that's something. I've translated this section on the 8 extraordinary vessels there, but you know, I haven't translated the whole book, and that's really the source of, like, them being paired with each other, like, you know, Du and Yang Chao and so forth. And you know, that's the source of those points, like Shenma UB62. No, well, not actually. That one is part of
Be
the
careful.
Yang
We'll call you out on that.
yeah,
You're
but
gonna
like
trigger me over here.
lung 7 for the Ren vessel.
Yeah.
And
Chiao for
lists
no
of
reason.
indications, and that those points are paired with each other. So that's the interesting text on the 8 extraordinary vessels.
Well, what I found interesting in volume the volume 5 that you did is Yang Zhizhou. What I've kind of traced is that it starts off with the Jinju Zhenan, like you said, which appears kind of like I think he has like these points treat certain patterns. And then afterwards, you had the Jinju Dachuan, which I think is in about 14th century. And then he starts listing, I think, some extra points that treat these patterns, along with maybe like lung 7 or kidney 6, something like that. And then finally, you get to the Jinju Dachang in 1601, which is in the volume that you translated. And then Yang Zhizhou further adds his own patterns to these 2 other lists that were compiled from the Jinju Zhenan and the Jinju Dachuan. So you actually see this kind of people taking this information, using it, and then supplementing it with their kind of own, I guess you would argue, clinical experience.
Yeah.
And I just think that, you know, for when people want to know about the 8 extraordinary channels and the points that and what they treat is, I just feel like this is something that everyone appears to be missing and not utilizing, and it's such a waste.
Because the esoteric, in quotes, air quotes around esoteric, the esoteric stuff is so much more sexy than what the old books actually said.
Yeah, totally.
Sorry for having that sarcasm in my voice.
No, absolutely.
I think you'll find supporters of myself and Will for that view, and I think that's also a large reason why Will wrote the book on the Qiao vessels as well.
Yeah, well, and also that's interesting, because how far is the Qijin Bamai Kao from the Zhenjiu Daceng?
So that precedes it. The Qijing Bamai Kao, which is the exposition of the 8 extraordinary vessels, if I recall, was written in 1578, while the Zhenjiu Dachang was in 1601. Right, but the Qijing Bamai Kao, I almost see that there's like these 2 kind of diverging schools when you're looking at the 8 extraordinary points. One appears to put emphasis on these on the 8 confluent points, while another one appears to be a little bit more interested in like the pathways of the meeting points, which often come out of the Zhenju Jiayi Jing. So, for example, in the Qijing Bamai Kao by Li Shezhen, they don't actually mention the 8 opening points. And for example,
Mm.
if I recall, I think there's like Zhang Jingyue in his book on his text on the eight opening points. So you kind of almost see these kind of two diverging schools: people who are pay attention to the eight opening points, and those who appear a little bit more concerned with perhaps the pathways of the points.
I think the split though is
That's my take.
between
Sorry.
acupuncturists versus herbalists who use the eight
Mm.
extraordinary vessels. The herbalists don't give a, about the points, those points. But there's also this funny story that's not, I don't know if it's true or not, but it's a story you can read. Maybe you guys know about it, that when Nixon went to China and he's talking to, I think, Deng Xiaoping, and he says, what do you think of the French Revolution? What effect did it have on Western culture? And Deng Xiaoping says, too soon to tell. And I think the thing about Li Shijian and those kind of people, Hua Shou, who wrote an elaboration on the 14 channels, and people like that, is like too soon to tell those 8 points. It's like not enough time has passed. There's not enough evidence yet. And for us, 300 years or whatever sounds like a huge amount of time, but for them, it was nothing.
I mean, arguably one of the, I think, most important texts of the 18th century, I think the Yizong Jinjian, had individual songs and discussions for each of the 8 extra points. They weren't necessarily paired though, or they didn't talk about pairing them, but they had songs for the individual use of those 8 extra points. And I think that text was like state sponsored or something like that. So to me, that gives fairly strong credence that they were held in fairly high regard to be kind of put into a government-sponsored textbook, the Yizong Jinjian, which is something like the ancestral golden mirror of medicine. I think you can translate it as such.
Yeah, that's a bit later though, right? So I mean,
Yeah,
a little more,
something.
a lot more time has passed.
And that's in a section on acupuncture, not in herbals.
Yeah.
Because really the herbalists didn't seem to care about those 8 points. Only the acupuncturists cared.
Well, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, because they're going to be needling them. So that's actually a really interesting point that I haven't thought about. Was this division between acupuncturists and herbalists? And I mean, it is interesting always, I think, to kind of like see where different ideas and authors kind of take them. Another interesting aspect of that text, which you've done a fair bit of work, is the, like, how would you say, time-based or chrono-based acupuncture? How do you?
I call it chrono-acupuncture.
Best define it. Yeah. And because there's a pretty big section of that in the text as well.
That's why I like that volume.
Oh, was that kind of the reason why you thought and looked at it and thought, oh, this is what's bringing me to this text? Because
so Jonathan Shell, the publisher, and I, like, we were conspiring, and we were saying, oh, we wish somebody would translate Zhenzhou Dacheng, but it's like too much. And so we had this idea together that if we could get 10 people each to translate one volume, we could have it. But it turns out like there were a couple other volumes that he contracted people to translate, but either the translation was not good, nowhere near good enough, or they wouldn't finish or whatever. So we only ended up with those 4, but better than none. But since it was like kind of my idea with him together, our scheme, then I got to pick which volumes I wanted. And volume 5 has the chronoacupuncture, and volume 9, which I later translated, has the Moxus stuff, and some other interesting things like incantations and a talisman and stuff like that, and case studies. Because I
was about to ask, does that one have the case studies? I wasn't sure if that was in volume 9 or 10.
9.
Is there any pediatrics in that volume, or is that volume 10?
Volume 10 is all pediatrics.
Yeah.
And I'm not doing that one.
No. Oh, well, I didn't actually realize that you did volume 9 as well, because Sabine Wilms did volume 1, you did volume 5. I think is it Yue? Yue did
Dr.
volume 8?
Liu, she's
Liu,
somebody,
sorry.
she teaches at one of the schools I teach,
Yep.
so I like dragged her in.
Ah.
Yeah, Yue Liu. She's great. She translated a few things that were
Did she do the
published. Well,
support?
she did the Zhishenjing. Yeah.
Yeah, the classic of supporting
nice.
life.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which you also edited, right?
Yeah. And then
Eh.
she helped me a lot. We really, she'd help me with stuff that I couldn't translate, and I helped her with editing. So yeah.
I gotta say, like I have a similar relationship with Alan Saw, and the ability to have someone to ask questions to who's a native of that language is indispensable. Absolutely indispensable.
Yeah.
Because for me, I would kind of just read things and it's the same thing I think sometimes when you read something in English, you're just like, it doesn't feel right. Sometimes like in your native language, you can just understand the feel of something, or even like just that innate, and as a foreigner trying to translate, you just look at something and you don't necessarily, at least for me, I lack that innate ability to feel sometimes, and so I do my best, but you always sometimes have lingering doubts.
One of the things to figure out is like when they're quoting something, but without saying, I'm quoting this. And it's like,
Right.
after a while, you start to kind of say, this must be a quote. So then you take those few characters and you Google them, and then you find out, oh, yeah, it's from Zhuozhuan or something,
Yeah.
So after the Genju Dachang, what was the next works that you did? Because you've done the Shuiji, you've done translations of case studies by, is it Tan? I
Yeah,
can't
Dr. Tan
remember
Yun
her
Chen.
name, sorry.
I think it might have been, the
Chen.
next book might have been Raising the Dead and
The
Returning
Qing
Life,
Dynasty one?
which is excerpts from a book, mostly about emergency medicine, but it's just excerpts. But my criteria was either it had to be useful today, or it had to be bizarre and interesting, but not like killing black dogs with their blood,
So can you tell us, because you've done 2 books on Shuiji,
Yes.
and was he around 15th century, something like that?
He was 1511.
Okay.
Oh, no. Yeah. He was 1530 something, like some of his books published.
Yeah. I thought he might have been born in the 1400s and then kind of lived into the 1500s, but I'm not entirely sure. But he was quite a prolific author as well, wasn't he? He wrote maybe 12 or 13 books?
Yeah, and he edited a bunch of books and compiled and added case studies, like the Liang Fang, the gynecology text. Yeah, he edited that and added a bunch of case studies, and then actually apparently his version became more used than the original one for a while in China. So
was he like an imperial physician or?
Yeah, but he retired and then had an active life back in where did he live? In the Suzhou region, and his dates are 1487 to 1559.
Okay. So just right in the Ming Dynasty.
Yeah.
And so what was it that it was attracting you to Shuiji? Why did you? I assume this was entirely your decision and idea to translate its stuff.
I found I really liked case studies, old case studies. So I just started, translating case studies. I was especially interested in case studies about women and, sure, gynecology, but I was like interested in the stories it told about women too, because in case studies, I mean, some of them are just purely medical, but some of them you get little glimpses into life. And so I just really like them. And then like searching around in various books, like the Ming and forgive my pronunciation because I don't
That's all right.
speak,
Yeah.
you know, the famous doctors, medical cases in the Ming Dynasty, and then there's the Shu Ming Leian, no,
that big one. That one is huge, isn't it?
Wow,
I don't know.
wow, I've
Anyway,
never
like
looked
the
at those.
Shuming Labian, something like that, isn't it? That I know the one you're
I can
talking
grab
about.
it from the other room,
Uh,
but you know, like, so I'd search around for case studies, and then I'd find a lot of case studies of his. So then I just started to say, you know, okay, who is he? And one of the things I like about Shuiji is that a large portion of the formulas he used are the formulas we still use today. So I thought it's more useful than somebody who uses so many formulas with odd ingredients that are toxic or endangered or, you know, expensive, or, you know, I mean, like he used Xiaoyao San all the time. He uses, you know, Lu Wei Di Huang Wan, Shen Qi Wan, Bu Zheng Yi Qi Tang, you know, he used Gui Pi Tang. He uses like so many of the formulas that we use today. And while, you know, maybe looking at more exotic things would be fun, but I thought this could be a bit useful and not just purely academic, to see how a famous ancient imperial doctor used our formulas.
So this would be, yeah.
I was just going to say, in the words of Chen Shu Yuan, because I've been reading his commentary of Zhang Ji Yue's formula, he will often say this formula is eclectic. And so we're not really looking at eclectic
Za.
formulas here. We're looking at really kind of stock standard stuff that is still being used. So that's really interesting.
The word is za, right? You say za
I
in
think he's
Chinese.
saying yeah.
Yeah, which actually has a little bit of like, I feel like it has a little bit of a demeaning connotation probably.
It's like random.
From Chen Shu Yuan, I think you can almost guarantee that he's
Yeah.
he's not saying it with kindness.
But the thing that's interesting, like just when you're Lorraine, when you're talking about just these formulas that Shuiji used, it seems like he's this, a little bit like Zhang Jingyue too, but he's this interesting figure in that he's sort of standing right on this transitional period between these, like the four masters, right? And kind of coming right after Li Dongyuan and Zhu Danxi, and then moving into this like the supplementing school, which comes about through Zhang Jingyue, but right in between those two, yeah.
He's mostly warm supplementation. I mean, he might not have said, I am warm supplementation. That's like put on him afterwards, but he's very much, you know, in that style. And Zhang Jiebin quotes him frequently, actually, I've noticed, or mentions him.
I mean, that's an interesting point that I think sometimes, you know, I think that isn't well known in the West, is that, you know, for example, even people like, you know, Li Dongyuan, he wasn't coming out saying, hey, I'm the spleen and stomach guy. He simply, from my perspective, he wrote a treatise to supplement something that he felt was missing from the medicine. That he's like, it wasn't like that was his only play. He just simply, it added to the body of medicine, just the same as like Zhu Danxi or Lu Wansu, you know, any of those guys. It was kind of like, and even, you know, like Zhang Sehe, he gets kind of this idea of being an attacking person. He promoted that, I feel like, because he perhaps felt like it wasn't being utilized very much. But he still had all these other kind of formulas and things like that they would use. They would still practice Zhang Zhongjing's formulas and things like that, you know, but they simply just wanted to bring something themselves came to it. So, you know, kind of Shuiji would probably never call himself that, even if that was kind of his modus operandi, or, you know, what he was kind of doing a lot of the time. They themselves wouldn't really coin themselves in that way.
All of them were so much more three-dimensional than when you put some name on, you know, a style.
I mean, right now I'm just trying to put Will Servols as the Chiao guy, and that's how we'll remember him. I'm working hard at the groundwork for that.
but you know, what you're kind of saying is like an interesting point, and something that Alan kind of drove home for me is how, like you're saying, each class of physicians seems to be somehow reacting to what is like sort of a mainstream at their time that they don't like, right? So, and so he has this whole thing Alan says about the Song Dynasty imperial formulas are too warming, right? And so then you get the Zhang Zihe and these people who are like, we need to get some more attacking or cooling and so forth. And so I would be interested to know also in terms, if we look at it like that, like what is Xueji doing, and like who is he learning from? Because like you say, when you just rattled off those formulas, Liu Wei Di Huang Wang, Gui Bi Tang, Wu Zhong Yi Ji Tang, these are like the bread and butter of TCM. And so they're so important for what people start learning in herbalism these days. And so where does that come from? Like I always thought that it was Zhang Jingyue was the guy that really brought in all this supplementation stuff. But it sounds like, in a big way, Xueji was also very important for that.
Yeah, I think so. He mostly saw deficiency, he mostly used warming herbs, but not hot herbs. And his formulas were pretty gentle most of the time. But remember, he's an imperial physician, so he's not going to give all these harsh formulas to,
Right.
the mother of the emperor or something like that, who he did actually treat. But did that define the kind of medicine he did, or was he hired for the job because he did fit that nicely? I don't know. But even when he wrote books, he was still like that. So I think imperial physicians probably aren't going to be the harshest.
Right.
It's interesting you say that, because I recall a paper, I think by Leslie de Vries, something like that.
Yep.
And he wrote about this kind of, the warming and supplementation school or something like that. And I think in it, Shu Ling Tai kind of criticizes people for not using attacking medicinals, because he sort of says, if something goes wrong, they're going to blame you if you use these like attacking medicinals. But if you use these warming and supplementing schools, they'll kind of think, oh, they did the best that they could. So it's kind of interesting to hear that kind of perspective, because, and even if you fail, and you use those medicinals, you still won't be blamed for, the death of someone. So that's a really interesting kind of view to see.
For Zhang Jingyue, you're saying he quotes a lot of Xueji. Now Xueji, do you see anyone that he's quoting a lot in his works?
I'm not remembering like that he quotes someone, but if you use Buzhong Yiqi Tang, you're quoting Li Dongyuan, right? I mean,
yeah.
So I think he might quote Li Dongyuan a couple times, but he didn't write these long flowery descriptions of this and that. He's not theoretical like Zhang Jiebin. He's like, if there's a chapter on irregular menstruation, he'll say these are the patterns, these are the herbs, and then he'll have cases. Doesn't go into a lot of, you'll find a nice sentence here or there that says something brilliant, but mostly it's like, these are the patterns, these are the formulas.
One thing I found interesting about him as well is that when I look at the books that he's written, it's almost like he tried to cover kind of like every aspect of the medicine. Like he has like a book on internal medicine, a book on external medicine, I think a book on gynecology, and amongst kind of other books. So he really tried to almost, looks like
jack of all trades, master of some.
I mean, to me, it's kind of like, he's really just almost trying to leave behind his whole system of medicine as well.
His specialty was external medicine.
Wow.
Dermatology and stuff like that. And they made fun of him after he died because apparently he died with some skin condition.
Did you translate that one? The one on
no
the external? No, okay.
Well,
You've done the
I
internal and
I
gynecology?
translated one that was on trauma, which is part of
Ah,
external medicine. But
okay, okay.
he has two dermatology books, and but it's mostly like abscesses and stuff that, you know, I'm not so interested in abscesses. Maybe I'd be interested if I had one.
Okay.
But
You know
yeah,
where to go if you get one. So
yeah,
He has internal medicine for that, or just external applications.
both. It's more internal, you know, herbs, and but there are some Gao and, you know, various things to apply externally. And
That's
he
good
did,
stuff.
yeah. I mean, if you're going to be an external, a Waika doctor, you better have some external things that you do,
Yeah.
as well as the internal herbs.
I can tell you a funny little story. I had the pleasure of learning a 2-day seminar with Mazen Al-Kafaji back in 2019 when he came to Australia. And, you know, he talks about this story where I think he came back from China and, you know, he put his nose up at external medicine and was only treating internal medicine. And he was treating this child. And anyway, you know, anyway, he sent this kid away. He wouldn't take the internal medicine, so he goes, okay, he made up some external kind of gal, something like that, paste, and anyway, gave it to him. And anyway, the kid came back and it helped his, you know, his skin condition really well. And I think, you know, Mazen, look, I might not tell the story exactly correctly, but then he sort of says after that, he became very interested in kind of external pastes and things like that. And I think, you know, Mazen being one of the premier external kind of disease doctors in the West is, you know, kind of telling that maybe, yeah, if you're treating external diseases, particularly skins, that you need to have a look at these kind of external pastes and ointments and things like that. And also Lorraine, not to give Mazen all the limelight, but you've also done videos on producing these kinds of things and classes, haven't you? Can you
Yeah,
tell us a little bit
it's
about that?
so how that started was with the Moxa translations, because sometimes, you know, my translation skills weren't that good. Not that they're that great now, but they weren't that good. And sometimes I'd be reading something and say, what? And the only way I could figure out how to translate it was like playing with it and trying it to see how that thing worked. And so with the Moxa translations, that's when I started trying stuff, not because I wanted to bring more methods to the West or something like that, but just to help with my translation. And then I kind of fell in love with like trying to work out from the written instructions, how do you do this or how do you do that? And so another thing I've done a lot is like translating formulas and then trying to make them not just more decoctions, because, you know, like everybody knows how to make decoctions, but
Yeah.
like
But
ointments
you
and syrups and, you know, all that kind of stuff, pills.
can you tell us a little bit of any of the ones that you found like really interesting that you've made, or something that you kind of could think would be really useful as well?
I
Got to
mean, I think
got to check
most
the
of it
memory bank.
is useful. I don't know. Sometimes, like, I really love the way they talk about stuff. Some of the syrups, you know, they say like, when you're done making this syrup, pour 3 little cups and make offerings to these 3 deities, and then, you know,
Cool.
and while you're preparing it, your mind has to be pure, and you know, it's just, some of it's fun. And if you take 100 doses of this, you can live to be 200 and some years, and, you know, all of this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of fun to translate as well as, but I forgot what your question was.
What is a syrup anyways? When I hear syrup, I think of like the Starbucks shots you get in your mocha latte or something. That could be cool, actually. That would be a nice application. But what is the Chinese for that?
So the word Gao has so many meanings, but its essential meaning is like a viscous liquid or semi-solid. And so a
Yeah.
Gao is there are actually 5 kinds of Gao, apparently. At least
Huh.
that's
Wow.
what modern people teach. So there's like an ointment, which is made with oil and beeswax. There's a hard plaster, which actually is hard until you warm it and then you stick it on. Not so much used today, but really interesting. There's soft plasters, which is ground up herbs mixed with sesame oil and beeswax. Instead of simmering the herbs and straining them out, now they're ground up and mixed in, soft plaster. And then there's a paste, which is mostly going to be a powder that is not, is kept in powder form until the time of use. And then you mix it with tea, or you mix it with egg white or something. And then the 5th kind of syrup, of which, to me, that's totally different. The other 4 external application, but the fact that it's a thick.
Oh, sorry,
Uh-oh.
Lorraine. We've just lost you a little bit. Can you just repeat what you
just
said?
when you
Sorry,
got
we
to
just
the
lost you for a moment.
just when you got to the
I think you were going to say syrup, but can you just repeat that, please?
Oh,
the last maybe just go from the last one you were talking about.
It says my internet is unstable. It just did flash for a sec, so hopefully I'll be stable now.
You're looking good now. So.
Okay, so the 5th type of Gao is syrups, which, what do they have in common with the other 4, which are all external application? It's a thick, viscous liquid. And so Chinese syrups tend to be made with honey, most of the time, processed honey. So you make a really condensed decoction, and you even boil it down more and more and more till there's, it's really thick and dense. And then if you have like 1 cup of decoction, you add 2 cups of honey, and then you boil it down some more. And of course, some people hate the idea of boiling honey because enzymes, but like I always tell them, they didn't use it because of enzymes. They used it for its Chinese properties. And so anyway, and then you've got, basically you're boiling off the water so the herbal qi is staying in the honey. Then that's a syrup, but it is similar to like those are called simple syrups, like that they put in a drink or something like that, because it's just if you have a high enough sugar content, it actually is preserving it. Right. And it doesn't go bad. And so whether it's honey or molasses or sugar, it's the same kind of idea. Plus it's sweet, so people don't mind taking it too much.
Nice. That was quite a class. I didn't know any of that stuff. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm info dumping.
Do you have these videos on your YouTube that people can watch?
Yes.
Okay.
If you just search for my name on YouTube, then you'll find my channel, and I've got videos of a lot of successful things and a few unsuccessful experiments as well.
We'll definitely put your link with this podcast as well, so you don't have to search. We'll definitely provide a link of Lorraine's works.
Absolutely.
Can you tell me then? Also, recently I've noticed you've been posting some lectures as well. I think there was one about emotions recently, and there's one about case studies or something like that. Can you tell us a little bit about some of these classes that you've been posting and what has kind of inspired you to do so?
So I'm always just running off on a tangent. I found out not that long ago that I'm just a little bit into the spectrum, and spectrum people get obsessed and just throw themselves into things, and also don't get along with humans. So I get along better with these old dead doctors than I do with the actual people around me.
And cats, right?
And cats, mostly, except when they bite me.
How's that doing it, by the way? Are you feeling better?
It's just, I don't know.
It looks
no
better,
pain.
Yeah.
We gotta find a gal for the bite.
Yeah. So what was I? So I just research topics just because I'm interested, and maybe after a while I'm not interested enough to make it into a book. I'm kind of, you guys know, doing a book, you have to do so much work to perfect it and edit it, and you have to do the whole thing, and if once you get bored you still have to finish it.
Right.
So
You basically do 90% of the work, and then you realize you've got 90% of the work to do.
So I have all of these things that I am interested in and that I like just translate stuff and research, and so I have a student named Eric Darvish who, like, we schemed and said, he'll do all the setup work and promo work and stuff like that for Emperor's College, one of the places that I teach. And it's mostly for students of that school, although teachers and alumni can come. And then, so I have, some translation on a topic, and then we're trying to make a discussion, but often people don't want to ask questions, but sometimes they ask a lot of questions. So the first time it was on all these case studies about emotions where, Zhang Zihe, who was mentioned before, Tianshi, or various other doctors, a case was due to emotional upset, and then they used one emotion to counteract that particular emotion. And so that's kind of fun.
Is that kind of based on like the Suen 5 cycle of the emotion kind of like controlling the other emotion?
Yeah, I forget the chapter of Suen. I don't think it's 5, but it is 5 element based, where if you have anger, which is wood, then you would use metal, sorrow, to counteract the anger. So you have to find a way to induce it in your patients. Well, we're not so likely to tell them, oh, your husband's dead, and then they have sorrow. We're not going to do that, but still, it's interesting. We did one on yin fire because they requested that, but that was just, I did it because it was requested. Yeah, it's kind of complex. And we did one on intent while needling, and then some other ideas about the word intent, because students are always interested in that. And I'm going to do one on ghosts in Chinese medicine because it's almost Halloween.
Nice.
Yeah. It's really interesting because you find out, like, some of the Chinese doctors seem to give credence to it, but a lot of the Chinese doctors are saying the ghosts are created out of their mind, and stuff like that. But interesting, Shuling Tai acknowledges that sometimes there are ghosts, actual ghosts, but sometimes it does come from your heart.
He has that essay in the what is it? It's like the history and development of Chinese medicine, something. Yeah, I can't remember the exact Chinese name, but the one that's translated by Paul Unschuld.
Yeah, and Zhang Jiabin talks about it in Beijing in some places, and and in Zhenzhou Dacheng Volume 9, then there's incantations against ghosts and stuff like that.
I'll say, like, just living in Taiwan, I wonder if, ancient China, or even like, dynastic China was like Taiwan, because Taiwan is so haunted, and ghosts are such an insanely like big part of life in Taiwan. And also just I think acupuncturists and herbalists here are super believing in ghosts. And like, I studied under a very prominent acupuncturist here who totally would, her diagnosis would be that the person was had gotten inhabited by ghosts. Yeah. And
was it you who told the story about picking up a hongbao on
the red envelope?
Yeah. So there's all kinds of stuff like that. I mean, just unbelievable. And something that this doctor would see a lot in clinic was what you could call like funeral syndrome, which was basically like, because they hold the funerals on the street, and so there's a lot of people, when they go by funerals, they get headaches and they get all kinds of issues. And so you get like people coming in the clinic, and their literal chief complaint is I went by a funeral and now I don't feel well. You know.
It sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah.
In astrology and in times when you should avoid funerals based on the astrological stuff. So, different, of course, in day selection, there are days when there shouldn't be a funeral at all, but there's also personal, based on your birth information,
Right.
when you should not go to a funeral or even not go to a hospital to visit a sick person. So yeah.
Yeah, so you have to imagine that, back in the day, it was absolutely a big part of their lives. And the risk is just to think of it too much from like a Western perspective of what we think of ghosts and I don't, whatever that is, whatever we bring to the table, right? But they definitely had, and sometimes they had quite an analytic sort of understanding of what ghosts do. Like you mentioned in Zhang Jiebin's Lei Jing Tui, he has this big analysis of what is Gui, what does Gui, this character, mean, what does Shen mean, and about yin yang dynamics and stuff like that. So it can get pretty. It can be like a useful thing that you could certainly add, but not need to resort to some sort of new age concepts or whatever else. Yeah.
And certainly if the patient believes that they're ghosts, or if the family believes it's a ghost, then you may have to do something psychological, even if you as a doctor don't believe it's a ghost. I mean, if you just say there's no such thing as ghosts, how's that going to help? How's the patient going to get better?
True.
So
True.
they did anti-ghost things.
And so what kind of anti-ghost things have you seen? Can you think of off the top of your head what were some
Well, like
that...
in Zhenzhou Dachang Volume 9, there are incantations and a talisman that's about getting rid of a ghost possession. And Yangji Zhou seems to act as if he believes that the ghosts are real. He doesn't say, I believe in ghosts, but he treats them as real, whether that's because he believes it or because he thinks it's what the patient needs. I don't know. But Zhang Jiebin seemed to say there's not ghosts, it's an emanation from your mind. And that if you have kidney deficiency, you see black ghosts, and if you have lung deficiency, you see white ghosts. And that comes from one of the lost chapters of Suen. Yeah, and so he's quoting from that and so forth. And then Chu-Ling Tai says, sometimes it's not ghosts, but sometimes it is ghosts.
Yeah.
But one thing that I find really interesting in Banzhou Gangmu by Li Shizhen, under the category of Sangju, the attract a lotus, ghosts don't like Sangju.
Okay.
Yeah, ghosts don't like it. There may be some other herbs. I mean, yeah, like mugwort, like Ai Cao or Changpu and stuff like that. But Sangju, and so I experimented with making, like I went through my incense making phase, in all my herbal experimentation, and Sangju smells really nice when you make it into incense and burn it. Some things, they don't smell so good.
Yeah.
Sangju smells good and it keeps away ghosts.
It's sort of a strong aromatics seem to all, Shichangpu and these kinds of things all seem to be used to a degree for that purpose. Yeah.
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 I was thinking it was interesting because this idea of what the patient kind of believes and what we kind of know as well. Because if you think about it now, with the advent of Western medicine, patients will go and get diagnostic tests done, and for example, like you might get someone and they go, all their diagnostic tests are fine, but they're still experiencing stomach pain or something like that. So they've been told that they're fine, but they still have this pain. So the question, is interesting, where if the patient kind of believes something is there, we still have to kind of treat it as such, I guess. you
Well,
know, this is
just
an
because
interesting idea.
Western
There
medicine
must be
says
something.
nothing is there, there may be chi stagnation or something that
Right.
Western medicine doesn't have a clue about. So they
Yeah.
may be absolutely correct. There's something there. It's just not something measurable by biomedicine.
Well, that's what I agree. But when you said that, I sort of thought, oh, you know, well, that's true. I get patients come in and they say everything's fine, but I still experience this, you know. So
Yeah.
that kind of I see that has a little bit of a kind of like a similarity to the
Yes.
ghost, but I haven't had any patients come in with ghosts yet.
For the funeral syndrome patients, because I've had quite a few, and they do tend to have like their pulse really tends to be very tight.
Mm.
Yeah, like I'd say tight, like mostly on the right side. So I do see it being this almost like I would say like a 麻黄附子细心汤, sort of like well, that wouldn't be tight on the right side, but essentially like an external cold that sort
Yeah.
of like entered inwards.
Yeah.
And typically like what the teacher would do is like she doesn't actually do acupuncture on the body. It's kind of a bit weird. She does like she calls it 结界, and is basically just putting like moxa sticks on all four corners. The person lies down and then they're surrounded by moxa essentially. Yeah, it
Makes
seems
sense to me.
Interesting.
yeah.
Uh,
I would do
Lorraine,
moxa on the person, but anyways, yeah, go ahead.
Lorraine, I'm just wondering, kind of like, you know, you've been translating stuff for a while. Is there any text that hasn't been translated that you would really like to see kind of translated? What's this kind of like, you know, this one text that maybe it's too big for you or something like that, but you want to see kind of the next generation do? What, oh, other texts, I should say. What would you like to see done, and why?
There's so many, but actually I always wanted more of Zhang Jaebin, so now we've got Alan.
Yeah.
A dream come true. Yeah.
And
He
that's
was one of my first loves.
really
I
wow.
wanted to translate him, but I find him more difficult than some of the others.
Oh,
I
so
tried
hard.
I tried
So
him.
hard.
I tried him too, and I thought this is too hard for me.
No, that's
Yeah.
Luckily,
impossible.
Alan came along. The volumes 1 to 3, I just, you know, and then the footnotes that Alan added
Oh
in
my
that volume, I
goodness.
just he's an absolute machine. We're getting
He's
ready to release
he's a
the
beast.
second volume for the
amazing.
formulas. Yeah, I you know I feel very privileged to work with him as well. He
Oh,
carries
yeah.
me pretty hard.
Yeah.
But
He's
sorry, go on.
I'm just astonished about his amazing abilities.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, we're working on the second volume of his formulas, which will hopefully be out maybe 3 to 4 months.
Nice.
So that's that, and that will put close to that, and then you know, we'll be announcing some of our next translation projects at Purple Cloud Press soon, but not yet. Well, but
Yay.
I think that'll be exciting.
Yeah. And that'll be a net. We'll have Alan on to the podcast at some point coming up as well. And that'll be it. This was actually very cool for me too, Lorraine, to get that context on Shiji. And it seems like chronologically we're kind of moving, you know, we've this seems like quite a spiritual predecessor to Zhang Jingyue. So it's very interesting. And hopefully we can get a little bit of we can pick Alan's brain on that as well, see what he has to say.
But Shuiji's so practical and not all this like big theoretical stuff. And then Zhang Jaebin, his mind goes everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you kind of like to sit somewhere in between the two, where you like the practical side but also the theoretical side? Because I kind of like I definitely feel like I like to kind of read both, and sometimes it's nice to get this kind of like theoretical explanation, but other times it's just nice to be told what to do.
You know, I've just found for my level of translation skills, I'm much better if it's something concrete. And when it's all this theoretical stuff and I don't necessarily understand it, then it's really hard to translate because I don't, yeah.
Well, maybe not just translating, but also kind of just reading, because you did a little bit on his discussion, like of Zhang Jingyue's discussion of the I Ching and medicine as well.
Yeah, I've unsuccessfully translated that.
But maybe we better
Too
leave that
humble.
for another podcast. I think maybe, because that's a pretty big can of worms. I think I Ching and the medicine, and I think that we could kind of have another great podcast about that. And I still feel like, there's other things that we could definitely have talked about. So hopefully,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
we can get you back on again soon, Lorraine, if you would grace us with your presence, because I've had a lovely time talking to
Yeah.
you as a fellow translator, and hearing, your wonderful stories, how it all begun, and how it develops, and how you choose your projects. It's thank you so much for sharing this all with us. I really appreciate it.
I'd say
Well,
recurring guest, maybe. Just give her a spot on the show.
it's
Yeah.
fun to talk to you too. It's like I don't have people to talk to so much. It's like they're bored with me going on and on endlessly about Chinese medicine, but I can go on like that with you guys.
Well,
Absolutely.
that's our main goal, is to try and, bring like-minded people here who love the medicine as much as we do, and have kind of, want to see it progress and get better. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Is there
Thank you
anything
for.
else that you'd like to say before we finish up? Well, I think are you speaking at the Pacific Symposium?
Yeah, I am on making syrups.
Nice.
It'll be good. It'll be good. I don't necessarily want to be in a room with humans right now, but
You need to get some sort of kind of syrup guard that you can put on that just protects you from the other people.
yeah, something like that. The just real quickly then, if I had one more thing to say, I just want to say my favorite book is Miscellaneous Records of a Female Doctor, which is about this woman doctor of the Ming Dynasty named Tan Yunxian. And I just think it's so cool that, like, while her book just barely survived, it did, and now it's out in the world. And then maybe a year ago, the phone rang, and it was Lisa C, who I don't know if you know who she is, but she's written a number of novels about
Wow.
mostly about, well, a lot of them are about women in ancient China. And she decided she wants to write a novel about Dr. Tan. And like,
Wow.
she just saw a line in Ili Wu's book about Tan. So she Googled it on the internet, and she found that it's been translated by me. And she tracked me down and called me. And I'm such a big fan of hers. It's so amazing. Like, if
Wow.
there's one person who could write about this doctor, I'm so glad that it's Lisa. And so the book is pretty much done, but it won't be out till next year. And I just can't wait to see it.
Don't
Can you
tempt
buy
us.
your
Don't
book?
tempt us, Lorraine.
Can you buy your book from Amazon?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll put a link to purchase that one with the podcast as well for you as well. So
Yeah.
I always think I think you got to try and support people out there who help translating and things like that. Otherwise, it doesn't get done. So
It's an immense
yeah.
amount of work. So,
It's true, but well, I don't know about you guys, but I don't make very much off of it.
no.
Yeah.
It's an endeavor of love,
It
absolutely.
is.
And for me, coming into Chinese medicine, the main thing that I always want to see is I want to leave it better than I found it. And I think that's something that kind of like, we can agree that you have really, really done with your works,
And you
Lorraine.
too,
Not
both
just for
of you,
acupuncture.
No.
both of you.
No.
Well, just, you've done acupuncture, you've done herbs, done case studies, and moxa. It's yeah, you've done great things for the medicine. But we'll have to get
Thank
you
you.
back on here to talk about it some more, and maybe, if that book is getting close to kind of coming out, we can talk a little bit more
Yes,
about that
absolutely.
next show as well. All right. Thank you so much
Great.
for coming and joining myself and Will today, Lorraine, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon.
It
Bye-bye.
was fun.